A low, persistent chime from the smart home system, a gentle melody, pulled Emily Oladil from a deep sleep. She surfaced slowly, tasting the faint, clean scent of the high-altitude air purification. It was the quality of the stillness, the total absence of a familiar, heavy presence beside her, that hit first. She opened her eyes, not to a sunbeam, but to the soft, diffused gray of Seoul morning light reflecting off the smooth, dark wood of their bedroom's ceiling. As she inhaled deeply, a sensation bloomed in her chest, not peace, but a startling, quiet resilience. It was a feeling so foreign it took her a moment to place it. Hope, cold but vital, like a hidden spring. Then she remembered the sheer, round weight of the number, for years. For years of marriage, a substantial foundation that deserved acknowledgement. She turned her head on the pillow, the cool silk of the bedding a contrast to the heat rising in her anticipation, and looked at the space beside her. It was empty, of course. The bespoke linen sheets on Kang Seung-Min's side were pristine, untouched. He'd likely stumbled into the soundproof private office or the guest room around 3 a.m., not wanting to disturb her. It was a courtesy that had long since curdled into indifference, a polite shield for profound disconnection. She didn't mind the emptiness this morning, though. Today, it was a canvas for her optimism. Seung-Min had been buried under a mountain of work for months, preparing for the colossal global AI acquisition, the kind of deal that would redefine his place as a tech chancellor. But he couldn't have forgotten this. Not completely. He couldn't have forgotten the exact day their lives had merged, the day the vibrant chaos of her world had slammed into the calculated precision of his. She rose, her bare feet padding silently across the vast, cold expanse of their penthouse's polished Hanok-style wooden floor. In the mirrored insert of the dressing room, she caught her reflection. A woman with tired eyes, yes, but a determined set to her jaw. Her long, dark boho-braided hair, usually tied back while she sketched, flowed like a cascade of ink down her back, a raw, sensual contrast to the minimalist luxury of the room. She was curvy, her silhouette a soft, powerful geometry that defied the sharp edges of the interior design. She would make an effort. For the sake of what they once were, she would try one more time. The day passed with the slow, agonizing drag of anticipation. As a fashion designer whose latest collection was inspired by the juxtaposition of African prints and traditional Korean silks, her mind was usually a tempest of creative energy. Today, it was muted, focused only on the clock. She called the high-end caterers, ordering Seung-Min's favorite meal, perfectly aged, marbled Hanwoo beef cooked in a complex galbi reduction, a dish too intricate for her own hands. She selected a rare bottle of Bordeaux from the climate-controlled wine cellar, the same vintage they'd drunk on their honeymoon on Jeju Island. She even dug out the box of vanilla-scented pillar candles from the back of a closet, the ones they'd bought for their first dinner in this monstrous, beautiful house overlooking the Han River. As evening bled into night, her preparations transformed the sterile, designer-perfect dining room. The long polished mahogany table, usually capable of seating 12 tech directors, felt less intimidating with just 2 places set at one end. The candles cast a soft, dancing light, smoothing the hard edges of the room and painting the walls in warm, living shadows. The air grew thick with the heavy, sweet scent of expectation and vanilla. She showered, the water hot and cleansing, but unable to wash away the tremor of nervousness in her stomach. She slipped into the crimson silk dress he'd once bought her in Milan, the one he'd said made her skin look like polished bronze and her curves a dangerous invitation. The fabric whispered against her thighs, a sensual promise that was all too real. She fussed with her hair, checking her phone repeatedly. 7 p.m. Their usual dinner time came and went. The Hanwoo would be drying out in the warming oven. The expensive wine, open to breathe, was now just flatly breathing. 8 p.m. She sat at the table, her posture perfect, listening to the hollow, lonely tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick was a tiny hammer chipping away at her hope, slowly, methodically. She imagined Seung-Min in a steel and glass conference room, his wavy, shoulder-length hair falling over his intense eyes, his focus absolute, His body coiled with the effortless, contained power of a predator. He was handsome in a way that defied reason, his muscular frame tailored perfectly into his bespoke suits. Yet, that physical perfection was the armor that shielded her out. 9 p.m. She didn't move. She allowed the silence to grow, a physical entity pressing down on her. The anticipation had calcified into a cold, heavy lump. 10 p.m. She finally stood. She didn't blow out the candles. She couldn't bear the finality of the smoke. Instead, she moved to the living room, curling into a corner of the vast, cream-colored sectional that neither of them ever truly used. Seoul glittered below, a tapestry of other lives, other dinners, other conversations. She watched the pinpricks of light, wondering how many of them were homes where people still looked at each other, still talked, still remembered the small, vital things. The click of the front door unlocking was so faint she almost missed it. The clock in the hall chimed once, midnight. His footsteps were heavy, weary, on the marble foyer. He didn't call out her name. He simply moved through the darkness of the house, a familiar shadow, a ghost in his own opulent life. He stopped short when he saw her on the sofa. "Emily? What are you doing sitting in the dark?" His voice was rough with exhaustion, devoid of any genuine curiosity. He loosened his tie, the expensive silk slithering through his fingers, and dropped his slim, futuristic briefcase by the door with a definitive thud. The sound was brutal. She didn't answer. She just watched him as he moved towards the kitchen. His mind clearly already on the next task, probably scouting for a cold soju or a beer before collapsing into bed. It was on his way back, a bottle of imported lager in his hand, that his eyes finally adjusted, and he took in the scene. The dining room table set for two. The crystal wine glasses, one still empty, the other half full of a hope that had long since gone flat. The faint, lingering scent of a special meal now ruined. A flicker of confusion crossed his handsome, tired face, momentarily softening the hard angles of his jaw. "Did we have? Were you expecting someone?" The question hung in the air, so utterly clueless, so completely devastating that for a moment Emily couldn't breathe. The last fragile pillar of her 4-year-long hope crumbled into dust. She uncurled herself from the sofa, standing slowly. The crimson silk whispered against her skin, a cruel mockery of the sensual evening she'd imagined. Her curves, usually a source of confidence, felt exposed and foolish under his indifferent gaze. "No, Seung-Min," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "A flat lake over a deep, cold abyss. I wasn't expecting someone. I was expecting you." He stared at her, his brow furrowed. She could see the cogs turning in his brilliant, business-obsessed mind. "Client dinner? Did I miss a memo? A tech launch party?" The calculations were almost visible on his face, but the real answer, the important one, wasn't there. He took a long swig of his beer, a gesture so casual it was violent, a dismissal wrapped in thirst. "I'm sorry. I had back-to-back calls with the New York office. The final terms of the AI acquisition are brutal. It ran late." He paused, offering what he thought was a lifeline. "You should have texted me. You should have remembered." The words screamed in her head, hot and bitter. But she didn't give them voice. What was the point? Explaining her pain would be like trying to describe the vibrant color palette of her handbag-inspired designs to a man born blind to color. The capacity to see it was simply gone. She walked past him towards the hallway that led to their separate quarters. Her perfume, a warm blend of vanilla and black fig, ghosted over him, a deliberate, silent challenge to his indifference. She stopped just short of the darkness, turning back to look at him one last time. He was already pulling out his phone, his thumb scrolling through emails, the forgotten anniversary, and his heartbroken wife already relegated to a minor logistical hiccup. In that final, silent moment, standing in the ruins of a day that had meant everything to her and nothing to him, the decision settled in her soul, quiet and absolute as stone. She was done. The trying, the hoping, the waiting, it was over. The amber she had so desperately been trying to shield from the wind had just been snuffed out, not by a storm, but by sheer, breathtaking neglect. And in the cold, final darkness, She knew there was no spark left to rekindle. No physical desire in the world could overcome this emotional famine. The silence of the penthouse the next morning was a physical presence, thick and heavy as wet wool. Seung-Min woke to it, the emptiness of the king-sized bed, a stark contrast to the crowded, buzzing landscape of his dreams, which were still filled with stock tickers and contract clauses. Last night was a blur of fatigue. He remembered Emily sitting in the dark, the strange formality of the set table. A prickle of unease, vague and unwelcome, had brushed against him before he buried it under the more immediate need for sleep. Now, in the stark clarity of the morning, the memory felt sharper, more accusatory. He found her in the kitchen. She wasn't making coffee, wasn't scrolling through her phone. She was just standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the bright, indifferent city, holding a mug of cold herbal tea. She was still wearing the crimson dress from the night before, its silk now crumpled, a testament to a sleepless night and a terrible, unspent energy. "You're up early," he said, his voice gravelly, already moving to the state-of-the-art espresso machine, his morning ritual as ingrained as his signature. The whir and grind of the beans shattered the quiet, a sound he usually found comforting. Today, it felt like an assault. "I never went to bed," she replied, her voice flat, her back still to him. The prickling sensation returned, morphing into a cold dread. He poured a shot of espresso, the dark liquid swirling like a tiny vortex of his own making. "Look, about last night. I'm sorry I was late. The New York call was a nightmare. We're finalizing the terms, and their legal team is being obstinate." It was an explanation, an offering. In his world, this was an apology. Emily turned slowly. The morning light was merciless, etching the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the tight, sensual set of her mouth. There was no anger there, which was worse. There was only a profound, bone-deep resignation. "It was our anniversary, Seung-Min," she said, the words dropping into the room like stones. "For years." He froze, the espresso cup halfway to his lips. The date, June 12th, clicked into place in his mind with a sickening finality. The catered meal, the candles, the dress. It wasn't a forgotten dinner party. It was a monument to his failure. A cold dread washed over him, quickly followed by a defensive heat. "Emily, God, I'm sorry. It completely slipped my mind. This acquisition, the pressure," he ran a hand through his already disheveled, wavy hair. "You know what this deal means for us? For our future." A bitter, quiet laugh escaped her. It was a sound he'd never heard from her before, a sound of finality. "Our future," she repeated, her gaze sweeping over the sterile, multi-million-dollar kitchen. "What future, Seung-Min? The one where you build us a bigger, gilded cage overlooking the Han River? The one where we continue to live in this beautiful, hollow arrangement where your only contribution is signing the checks for its upkeep?" The words hit their mark. "That's not fair," he shot back, his voice hardening. The shock was morphing into frustration. He was working himself to the bone, driving his body to the brink for this empire. And this was the thanks he got. "Everything I do, the late nights, the travel, the stress, it's all for this. For you. For the life we have. For you." The word exploded from her, finally shattering her icy calm. "Don't you dare hide behind us. This life, this isn't the life I wanted. It's the life your ambition demanded. I didn't ask for a penthouse that feels like a hotel. I didn't ask for a husband who is a ghost, who communicates through his assistant, GA, and whose idea of intimacy is a text message sent from another time zone." Her chest rose and fell rapidly beneath the silk. "I asked for a partner. I asked for the man who laughed so hard he choked on his kimchi stew when I tried to make it for the first time. Where is he?" Her eyes were blazing now, dark and intense. All the accumulated resentment of 4 years poured out. "Your obsession with success hasn't built us a future, Seung-Min. It's built a shrine to your own ego, and you've locked me inside it. I feel my own creativity, my own soul, dulling just by being near your cold spreadsheets." He stared at her, his jaw tight, his handsome face rigid. He felt cornered, attacked for the very drive that had always defined him. Cold logic, she'd once called it. He reached for it now, his only shield. This obsession, as you call it, pays for the roof over our heads. It pays for that dress. He gestured to the crumpled crimson silk, the movement unintentionally tracing her curves, sending a raw, unwelcome jolt of memory through them both. It pays for the vacations you take to Paris for fabrics, for the security of never having to worry. It's a foundation, a practical, necessary foundation. You think love pays the bills? Passion stocks the wine cellar. His words were crisp, clinical, designed to dismantle her emotional argument. I am building something real, something tangible. The words meant to defend delivered a final killing blow. Emily looked at him as if seeing a stranger. The fire in her eyes guttered out, replaced by a chilling, absolute certainty. Tangible, she echoed softly, the word tasting like ash. She placed the cold mug on the counter with a precise click. You're right. It is all very tangible and completely empty. She walked out of the kitchen, her movements deliberate and final. The confrontation was over. There was nothing left to say. Seung-Min stood rooted to the spot, the steam from his untouched espresso curling into the air like a ghost. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. Her words echoed in the hollow space, and for the first time, the sheer staggering expense of the penthouse felt not like an achievement, but a failure. Upstairs, he heard the quiet, efficient sounds of drawers opening and closing, the zip of a suitcase, the sounds of a life being packed away. He should go up there. He should stop her. He should say something, anything to fix this. But the cold logic that had always served him so well had no algorithm for this. It could calculate market trends and merger potentials, but it couldn't formulate the words to make his wife stay. He remained in the kitchen, a king in his empty castle, listening to the footsteps of the one person who made it a home walking away. He imagined her in their bedroom, her slender but strong hands folding her beautiful, brightly colored fabrics, her long braids swinging slightly as she moved. The image was intensely sensual, a memory of domestic intimacy that now felt like a profound physical deprivation. He wanted to follow her, not to argue, but simply to bury his face in her fragrant hair and beg her to stay. He was frozen, crippled by the fear of rejection. That night, alone in the cavernous master bedroom, Seung-Min lay staring at the ceiling, the city lights reflecting coldly on the mirrored walls. The space beside him was a yawning chasm. He replayed their argument, her accusations, a hollow arrangement. Was that all it was? Had the man who choked on his kimchi stew truly been erased by the man who forgot an anniversary? He reached out, his hand instinctively seeking the warmth of her body, but finding only the chill of the sheets. The ghost of her fragrance, vanilla and black fig, was the only proof she had ever been there. Across Seoul, in a sterile short-term rental apartment near the vibrant Hongdae district that smelled of bleach and loneliness, Emily sat on the edge of a generic bed, her single suitcase standing by the door like a sentinel. She had done it. She had left. So why did it feel less like a liberation and more like an amputation? She thought of his face, not in anger, but in the moments before the fight, the genuine, bewildered shock when he'd realized what he'd forgotten. In that moment, he hadn't looked like a cold-hearted tycoon. He'd looked like the man she'd fallen in love with, who was simply tragically lost. A memory flashed, the feel of his hard, muscular body pressed against hers, the intense focus in his dark eyes right before he kissed her, a focus that was solely hers. The sheer, raw heat between them had always been a physical language, primal and undeniable, capable of melting the logic of his world and the boundaries of hers. Now, that connection was severed. In their separate silences, miles apart but bound by the same broken history, the same question haunted them both, where, in the relentless pursuit of more, had they lost everything? The papers arrived in a crisp beige envelope bearing the imposing logo of Kim and Associates, one of Seoul's most formidable law firms. Seung-Min's assistant, Jie, placed it on his sleek, minimalist desk with a quiet, almost reverent dread, as if handling a live explosive. He stared at it, the thick packet of paper seeming to suck all the air out of his corner office, which boasted a 270-degree view of the city he owned. The words petition for dissolution of marriage were printed in a brutal, unadorned font. This was Emily's answer. Not a scream, not a tearful phone call, but a legal document. The final logical conclusion to his own cold logic. He tried to bury himself in work. The global AI acquisition was entering its most critical phase. The due diligence reports were 1,000 pages thick. The financial models complex enough to make most analysts weep. This was his element, a battlefield of numbers and strategy where he was undefeated. But for the first time in his career, he found he couldn't concentrate. Emily's ghost had infiltrated his sanctuary. It wasn't a dramatic haunting. It was the subtle, relentless kind. The warm, earthy scent of her black fig perfume would waft past him in the sterile, recycled air. He'd look up from a spreadsheet and see her, not as she was now with those wounded, resolute eyes, but as she had been, laughing, her head thrown back. A smear of tteokbokki sauce on her cheek as she attempted to cook a Korean meal for his birthday in their first cramped apartment near Gangnam. He'd hear her voice, not the flat, final tone from the kitchen, but the warm, teasing lilt she used to call his name from another room, just to tell him a silly joke. He was in a boardroom presenting the final acquisition blueprint to a room full of stone-faced executives when a memory ambushed him. It was their first anniversary. He'd been a junior associate, broke and overwhelmed. He'd saved for months to buy her a simple, hand-painted ceramic pin from Insadong. The look on her face, pure, unadulterated joy, not at the gift, but at the fact that he'd remembered, that he'd chosen her over work, had been worth more than any deal. Now he was on the verge of the biggest deal of his life, and he had lost the woman who had made that joy possible. Sejangnam, CEO, a voice cut through his reverie. Director Choi, the head of the rival conglomerate, was staring at him, a question hanging in the air. Seung-Min had lost his train of thought. He, Kang Seung-Min, who was famed for his razor-sharp focus, had drifted off in the most important meeting of his life. He recovered, smoothly, deflecting, but the crack in his armor was visible. He felt their eyes on him, sensing a weakness they hadn't known was there. Meanwhile, Emily was learning how to breathe again. The sterile rental apartment was slowly becoming hers. A cheap, cheerful easel stood by the largest window, and the once white walls were now adorned with canvases splashed with bold, experimental color, combining the rich, earthy tones of West African dyes with the cool, reserved minimalism of Korean art. She'd forgotten the feel of a paintbrush in her hand, the liberating mess of oils on her skin. For years, her creativity had been channeled into designing a life that was aesthetically perfect for a man who was never there to see it. She met friends, other expatriates, fellow designers, and local artists for long, loud lunches where the conversation wasn't a minefield of unspoken resentments. She laughed, a real, belly-deep laugh that startled her with its force. She walked in Noms and Park without checking her phone, feeling the sun on her face, rediscovering the simple, sensual rhythm of her own company. The constant, low-grade ache of loneliness that had been her companion in the penthouse was receding, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of peace. She was rediscovering Emily, the woman who existed before and outside of being Mrs. Kang Seung-Min. But Seung-Min was a stubborn ghost in her heart, too. A song on the radio, a deep, sensual R&B track they both loved, the scent of his particular brand of sandalwood cologne on a passerby, the way a certain man would lean his head back. These small, insignificant things would trip a wire in her memory, and a flood of images would follow. His hand, warm and sure, holding hers in a crowded room. The way he'd look at her sometimes, back when his eyes held more than just preoccupied calculation, the feel of his powerful, muscular body curled around hers in the early morning before the world woke up to claim him. The heavy weight of his arm across her waist, the familiar, intoxicating scent of him on the sheets. She wasn't erasing him. She was learning to live with the hollow space he'd left behind, while battling the persistent, magnetic hum of unfulfilled desire that only he had ever been able to quench. The meeting was set at a neutral location, a quiet, wood-paneled conference room at Kim and Associates. Emily arrived first, her posture straight in a simple, elegant black dress that still allowed the sensual curve of her hips to be seen. Her braids, freshly styled, framed her face with a soft, defiant beauty. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were an actress playing a part in a legal drama. Then he walked in. The air crackled, thick with a decade of shared history condensed into a single charged moment. He looked older, the lines on his face more deeply etched, but he still carried that same magnetic intensity that had drawn her to him a lifetime ago. His wavy, shoulder-length hair was immaculately styled, his custom-tailored charcoal suit draping over his muscled frame like a second skin. Every inch the powerful CEO, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a turbulent storm of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. Resentment, yes, but also a flicker of pain, and something else, something that looked unsettlingly like raw, unmediated hunger. "Emily," he said, his voice low, a velvet rumble that vibrated through the silent room. "Seung-Min," she replied, her tone carefully neutral, masking the sudden, terrifying flutter in her stomach. They sat across from each other, the polished mahogany table a vast, impassable gulf between them. Their lawyers began speaking, their voices a dry, legalistic hum, division of assets, spousal support, irreconcilable differences. Seung-Min's gaze never left her. It was a physical weight. She could feel it tracing the line of her jaw, the new lightness in her eyes, the subtle tension in her body caused by his mere proximity. He was studying her the way he studied a competitor's financial report, looking for weaknesses, for leverage. "The penthouse," his lawyer said, "my client is prepared to offer a generous buyout, given it was purchased pre-marriage." Emily kept her eyes on her own lawyer, but she felt Seung-Min's stare intensify, burning into her. She knew what he was thinking. He was seeing the woman who had packed a suitcase and walked out, the woman who was now calmly discussing the dissolution of their life together. The woman who was no longer waiting for him, and the memory of the desire he'd so carelessly neglected hit him like a physical blow. "The penthouse was our marital home," her lawyer countered smoothly. "My client has a claim." The words swirled around them, but the real conversation was happening in the silence. In the way his jaw tightened when she didn't flinch, in the way her breath hitched when he leaned forward, his familiar, intoxicating scent, sandalwood and expensive leather, washing over her, a painful reminder of an intimacy long lost. He was every bit the cold, successful man she had accused him of being. And yet, sitting across from him, feeling the raw, untamed energy of his presence, the way her body instinctively remembered the rhythm of his, she couldn't deny the painful, persistent pull of the man she had once loved. It was all there, tangled together in the space between them, the deep, festering resentment, the shocking, unwelcome flicker of attraction, and the profound, echoing pain of what they had broken. The tension was almost unbearably sensual, a battle fought not with words, but with shared air and memories of the flesh. The legal papers were just a formality. The real divorce was happening right here, in this room, in the agonizing space between two people who had become the most painful kind of strangers, yet whose physical chemistry remained a volatile, unquenched inferno. The rain was a relentless gray curtain turning the city's glittering lights into watery smears. Seung-Min squinted through the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep pace. It was past midnight, and the acquisition documents were finally, exhaustively complete. A hollow victory. The silence of the car was a vacuum. And in that vacuum, Emily's face from the lawyer's office swam before him. Not angry, not sad, but resolute. Finished. His head throbbed. A dull ache behind his eyes that coffee and sheer will could no longer suppress. The numbers on the financial statements began to blur and dance. He reached for the climate control, turning the air to Arctic, hoping the shock would jolt him back to alertness. It was a trick that had worked 100 times before. But this fatigue was different. It wasn't just physical. It was a soul-deep exhaustion. The kind that seeped into bone marrow. The kind born from sleeping in an empty bed and eating meals alone at a table meant for 12. He fumbled for the radio, but his fingers, thick and clumsy, felt unresponsive. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. Emily, years ago, snatching the keys from his hand after a late night. "You're exhausted, Min. I'm driving." She'd driven him home in his own sports car, her small, strong hands confident on the wheel, humming along to some silly Afrobeats track on the radio. His head lolling against the headrest as he watched her, utterly captivated by the sight of her profile lit by the streetlights, her mouth curved in a slight smile. The memory was a sweet, sharp pain, tearing through the last vestiges of his focus. His focus shattered completely. He didn't even see the tail lights of the stopped delivery truck, a dark hulk in the pouring rain. His brain, addled by fatigue and heartache, registered the danger a fraction of a second too late. His foot slammed on the brake, but the wet asphalt offered no purchase. The world erupted into a symphony of screaming metal and shattering glass. Then nothing. Emily was dreaming of a field of sunflowers, the paint on her canvas a vibrant, impossible yellow, when her phone screamed into the silence. She jolted upright, heart hammering against her ribs. The clock glowed 2:17 a.m. No one called at this hour with good news. A stranger's voice, calm and professional, identified herself as a nurse from Seoul National University Hospital. There had been an accident. Mr. Kang Seung-Min was being admitted. She was listed as his emergency contact. The world tilted. Emergency contact. A bureaucratic oversight, a relic of a life she had legally begun to dismantle just days ago. "You should call his assistant, GA," Emily managed, her throat tight. "She handles his schedule." "He was asking for you, ma'am," the nurse said, her tone softening slightly. "He's been in and out of consciousness, but he's been saying your name." The words were a hook, digging deep into a part of her she had sworn to lock away. "You shouldn't go." A voice, cold and sensible, whispered in her mind. "This is not your problem anymore. This is the consequence of his choices." But another, more primal instinct was already taking over. She was pulling on jeans and a sweater, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie her sneakers. The image of him, proud and invincible Seung-Min, broken and asking for her, was unbearable. She shouldn't care, but God, she did. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. The fluorescent lights hummed a sterile, mournful tune. Emily found his room, her steps slowing as she approached the doorway. He was a stark contrast against the white sheets. His face was pale, a dark, angry bruise blooming across his forehead and cheekbone. His left arm was in a cast, held in a sling against his chest. Tubes and wires snaked from his other arm, connecting him to beeping monitors that charted the fragile rhythm of his life. The powerful CEO was gone. In his place was a man, vulnerable and broken. Her breath caught. The wall she had so carefully constructed around her heart, the walls of resentment and self-preservation, developed a hairline crack. She moved closer, her shadow falling over the bed. His eyes fluttered open. They were glassy with painkillers, unfocused, but they found her. "Emily." His voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of all its usual authority. It was just a man's voice, raw with pain. She didn't speak. She couldn't. He tried to shift, a grimace of pain twisting his handsome features. The anniversary," he mumbled, his words slurred and thick. "God, I'm so sorry, Em." A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down Emily's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. His eyes closed again, the drugs pulling him back under, but he was fighting it, his brow furrowed in a desperate struggle. "I wanted to give you everything," he breathed, the words barely audible. "I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved." Then he was gone, sinking back into the depths of unconsciousness. But the words hung in the air, more powerful than any legal argument, any angry confrontation. They were an admission, a confession wrung from him not by a lawyer, but by sheer physical brokenness. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't hiding behind logic or ambition. He was apologizing for his very soul. Emily's hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers hesitating just above his before she gently laid them on his uninjured arm. The skin was warm, real. This wasn't the untouchable titan of industry. This was Seung-Min, the one who had gotten lost. She stood there for a long time in the quiet, beeping stillness of the room, holding on to his arm as if she could anchor him to this world. The rain had stopped. Outside the window, Seoul was beginning to wake up, oblivious to the small seismic shift happening in a sterile room on the 7th floor. The walls of her resolve were not just cracked. They were crumbling. And behind them, to her utter terror, she could feel the stubborn, undeniable embers of a love she thought had long since turned to ash. The old, fierce, physical magnetism was humming beneath the surface of her grief, a constant reminder of the life his body had brought to hers. The first few days of his recovery were a study in awkward necessity. Emily's presence in Seung-Min's penthouse was a ghost from a future that no longer existed. She moved through the familiar rooms with a visitor's caution, her small travel bag standing by the door like a promise to leave. She told herself it was basic human decency. He was concussed, his arm broken, his body a tapestry of purple and blue bruises. He couldn't pour his own baricha barley tea, let alone manage the intricate cocktail of painkillers the doctors had prescribed. But the truth, which she guarded fiercely, was the echo of his hospital room apology. "I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved," had disarmed her completely. Seung-Min, for his part, was a terrible patient. The forced inertia was a special kind of hell for a man whose worth was measured in motion and deals closed. He was irritable, frustrated by his own helplessness, the intensity of his restless energy magnified by his injury. The first time he tried to get out of bed alone, ignoring her explicit instruction, he crumpled to the floor with a grunt of pain. Emily found him there, his face tight with physical agony and the humiliation of his own vulnerability. His wavy hair was matted with sweat, softening the hard, handsome lines of his face. "Let me help you," she'd said, her voice firm, not offering a choice. He nodded, gritting his teeth as she slid a shoulder under his good arm, her body slight but surprisingly strong. As she guided his considerable weight back toward the bed, the contact was electric. Her soft, curvy frame was momentarily pressed against his hard, muscled side. The air tightened around them, heavy with the memory of how their bodies moved together. His low, pained groan in her ear was intensely intimate, stripping away the CEO persona and leaving only the man. It was the first time they had touched without anger or lawyers between them in over a year, and the unmistakable, intense sexual chemistry that had always defined them roared back to life, muted only by the circumstances. Slowly, reluctantly, the dynamic shifted. The awkwardness began to melt, replaced by a quiet, practiced rhythm. She learned how he took his tea now, stronger, with a slice of lemon, not the honey he'd always claimed to prefer. He remembered she hated the sound of the financial news first thing in the morning and would wait until she was in the shower before turning on the television. They were forced into proximity, and in that shared space, the armor began to fall away. One afternoon, she found him staring out the vast living room window, his good hand resting on the glass. The city sprawled below him, his kingdom, but he looked like a prisoner. "It's the global AI acquisition," he said, not turning around, his voice low. "It's finalizing without me. Director Choi's team is making changes. My team is adapting." "Isn't that what you built them for?" she asked, coming to stand a few feet away. "Yes," he said, the word heavy. "But I built it all because I was terrified." The admission hung in the air, so quiet and raw it was almost swallowed by the room's expanse. Emily stayed silent, willing him to continue. He finally turned to look at her, his gaze unguarded. "When we got married, I was just starting out, buried under debt, carrying the immense pressure of my family's name. You came from warmth, from a family that laughed and created beauty with their hands. I saw the life your parents had, the abundance of love and genuine connection, and I was so damn scared I could never give that to you. That my cold, calculated world would be the reason your vibrant light went out." He gave a hollow laugh. "So, I worked. I thought if I could build a fortress of success, the biggest, most powerful tech empire in Asia, you'd be safe inside. You'd never want for anything. I never realized I was building the walls so high, you'd be left in the cold." Emily's breath caught. This was the core of it. This was the wound she had never been able to reach. It wasn't just ambition. It was deep, cultural fear translated into hypermasculine provision. She moved to the sofa, sitting, tucking her feet beneath her. The afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across the room. "I was safe, Seung-Min," she said softly, her eyes on her hands. "And I was so lonely. You were right beside me, but you were a million miles away." I'd talk about my day, about a design I was struggling with, about a dream I'd had, even about the sheer, electric need I had for you at night, and I could see you listening, but you weren't hearing me. You were already solving a problem in your head. I stopped talking because it felt like I was interrupting. She looked up, her eyes glistening. The worst part was, I had everything a woman could supposedly want. A beautiful home, financial freedom, a successful husband, and I felt like I was dying of thirst in the middle of the ocean. He listened, truly listened, without preparing a defense. He simply absorbed her words, his face a mask of dawning, painful understanding. "I thought providing was love," he whispered, the admission tearing at him. "And I thought attention was," she replied. "And I thought the way our bodies instantly and violently recognized each other, the fire we had, was enough to bridge the distance. But the physical connection was only fuel for the fire, Seung-Min. It wasn't the foundation." In the silence that followed, something nodded between them. The air, once thick with unspoken grievances, began to clear. They started talking, not about assets or schedules, but about real things. He told her about the pressure from his board, the constant gnawing fear of being seen as an imposter, the loneliness of being at the top. She confessed her own fears of being irrelevant, of her art being trivial, of fading into the decorative background of his life. One evening, Seung-Min woke suddenly from a painkiller-induced nap. He was restless, his eyes wide in the semi-darkness. Emily was dozing in the armchair beside him, a book resting forgotten on her lap, her fragrant braids cascading over the cushion. He watched her, unable to move his casted arm, but suddenly, desperately needing to feel her skin against his. He whispered, his voice rough. She stirred instantly, her eyes opening, already alert. "What is it? Pain? No. Yes. It's just cold." A pathetic lie, but the raw need in his voice was undeniable. She stood, the crimson silk dress now replaced by soft cotton lounge pants and a fitted tank top that emphasized her curves. She looked down at him, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. Without a word, she gently climbed onto the edge of the king-sized bed, sitting beside his hip, her hand instinctively resting on his good shoulder. The heat of her touch was immediate, a powerful current running through him. "Where does it hurt, Min?" she asked, her voice low, professional. "Everywhere you aren't," he murmured, the words escaping him before he could stop them. His dark eyes, usually so controlled, were vulnerable, fixed on her mouth. She gasped softly, pulling her hand back, but he caught her wrist with his uninjured hand, his grip surprisingly firm. He brought her hand to his chest, pressing her palm flat against the rapid, heavy thump of his heart. "The pain isn't the bone, Emily. It's here. It's remembering what it felt like to have you here, pressed against me, your scent on my pillow, your braids tangled with mine. I'd wake up needing you, that animal need, but I'd let the clock win. I'd trade that raw, human fire for another hour of work. I don't know who that man was." She leaned closer, the scent of his skin, musk and sandalwood, filling her senses, overwhelming her with memory. She could feel the hard, defined muscle beneath her palm, the sheer physical power he possessed. The attraction was a terrible, beautiful force. It made her ache with a need that was deeper than anything she'd felt in years. "Don't do this, Seung-Min," she breathed, her voice a warning to herself more than him. "I have to," he whispered, his hand sliding up her arm, his thumb brushing the delicate skin just beneath her shoulder, sending a searing shockwave of desire through her body. "I have to tell you the truth of how much I miss this. I missed your heat. I missed the way your body curves perfectly against mine. The loneliness wasn't emotional, it was physical, spiritual. You are the only person who has ever made me feel like I was more than a machine, and I pushed you away for a better spreadsheet." He didn't try to kiss her. He simply held her hand against his frantic heart, his eyes conveying a plea that was intensely and purely physical, a silent acknowledgement of the volatile, unquenched desire that still connected them, a connection they had both sworn was dead. She felt her resolve begin to crumble, replaced by a deep, shuddering need to answer his truth with her own body. She finally gave in, leaning forward and pressing her forehead against his, closing her eyes, allowing the familiar, intoxicating scent of him to fill her. The contact was agonizingly tender and powerfully sensual. This was the man she loved, broken and desperate, his very vulnerability an irresistible draw. If the intense chemistry and raw honesty between Emily and Seung-Min has you hooked, give this story a like and drop a comment below letting us know what you think Emily should do next. Your support keeps the emotional journey going. The fragile peace of the penthouse was shattered by the insistent buzz of Seung-Min's phone. It had been a week of quiet conversations, tentative touches, and near misses of passion, a week where the world outside had felt like a distant, irrelevant dream. But the dream was over. Emily watched from the breakfast bar as Seung-Min's posture transformed. The relaxed slope of his shoulders snapped back into a rigid line. The softness in his eyes was instantly replaced by the familiar, sharp focus that had always preceded a corporate battle. When he barked into the phone, his voice all business, he listened, his jaw tightening, the handsome mask of the CEO slamming back into place. Director Choi can't do that. The exclusivity clause is ironclad. He paced the length of the living room, a caged tiger, the sling on his arm a stark white reminder of his vulnerability, yet incapable of containing his furious energy. No. Tell them I'll be there in 30 minutes. Prepare the counteroffer now. He ended the call, his mind already light years away, calculating damage, strategizing counters. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, seemed surprised to see Emily there. The two worlds, the one of healing and the one of high-stakes business, collided in his gaze. The AI acquisition, he said, his tone clipped. Director Choi is using my absence to renegotiate the core terms. He's trying to gut the profit share. I have to go in. A cold dread, ancient and familiar, trickled down Emily's spine. It was a perfect echo of 1,000 other moments. The interrupted dinner, the cancelled vacation, the anniversary forgotten. The script was written, and he was falling back into his role with practiced ease. I see, she said, her voice carefully neutral. She turned and began rinsing her coffee mug in the sink. The mundane action was a shield for the turmoil inside. This is it, she thought. The test, and he's failing. He moved towards the door, grabbing his jacket one-handed. I don't know how long this will take. Don't wait up. The phrase was a ghost from their past, a phrase that had always meant, I choose the company tonight. It hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of history. Emily didn't turn around. She heard his footsteps pause at the doorway. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. She could feel him wrestling with it, the pull of the crisis warring with the new, fragile connection they had forged. Then, she heard a soft thud, the sound of his expensive briefcase being set down on the polished wooden floor. She turned slowly. He was still standing by the door, but his shoulders had slumped. The frantic energy had drained from him, leaving behind a man who looked utterly exhausted, yet fiercely determined. No, he said, the word quiet but definitive. Emily stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. No, he repeated, his gaze finding hers. It was clear, resolute, terrifying. Let them gut it. Let the deal fall apart. I'm not going. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. In all the years of their marriage, Kang Seung-Min had never, ever walked away from a fight. His ambition was his compass, his identity. To choose otherwise was unthinkable. Seung-Min, this is your merger. Your legacy. You could lose billions. No, he said, walking back towards her, his steps slow but sure. This is my legacy. He gestured between the two of them, his voice gaining strength. This right here. I spent a decade building a company because I was terrified of being a failure. But I was so busy building a monument to my success that I failed at the only thing that ever truly mattered. I failed you. He stopped a few feet from her, his expression raw, the intensity of his confession overwhelming the space. That night in the car, I wasn't thinking about the acquisition. I was thinking about you. About the look on your face in the lawyer's office. I was thinking that if I died in that wreck, my last words to you would have been about a stock option. I can't do that again, Em. I won't. He was choosing her, not as an afterthought, not when it was convenient, but in the heat of the biggest battle of his professional life. He was letting his fortress crumble and standing exposed in the ruins for her. Emily felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. The walls around her heart, which had withstood his apology and his vulnerability, now trembled at this ultimate sacrifice. This was the proof she had never dared to hope for. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of joy. They were tears of profound, terrifying confusion. He saw her hesitation, the conflict warring on her face. "It's okay," he whispered, his own hope dimming slightly. "I don't expect. I know it's not that simple." "It's not," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself. "You have no idea what it means that you're doing this. It's everything I ever wanted." But, he prompted gently. "But can a choice made in a moment really undo years of choices that made me feel invisible? The intense fire we have, the incredible, desperate way our bodies have always communicated, it masked the rot underneath." "I believe you mean it now, Seung-Min. I do. But what happens when the next crisis comes? What happens when the fear creeps back in? Is this a change of heart, or just a beautiful, painful epilogue?" She looked at him, her love for him a painful, living thing in her chest, warring with a self-preservation that had been 4 years in the making. "I love you," she said, the words a confession and a lament. "I think a part of me never stopped. But love isn't always enough, is it? Not when there's so much scar tissue." She reached up, her hand cupping the uninjured side of his face, her thumb stroking the hard line of his jaw. The contact was excruciatingly tender. "I need to know if this is a new beginning or just a beautiful, fragile moment. I need some time. I need to think." And for the second time, she walked out of the penthouse, leaving him standing amidst the ruins of his ambition. But this time, it wasn't an escape from a cold marriage. It was a retreat from the terrifying, dazzling prospect of a warm one and the haunting question of whether it was built on a foundation too damaged to hold its weight. The first anniversary of the night Emily left was a ghost that haunted them both. She spent it in her vibrant Hyundai apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her own rediscovered life, canvases leaning against walls, well-loved books, the comfortable clutter of a person truly in residence. She had launched a small, successful fashion line, marrying the bold geometry of West African textile art with the clean, modern cuts of Korean design. Her work was a testament to her independence. She expected silence from him. A text, perhaps, laden with the weight of memory. But her phone remained quiet, and she found herself both relieved and profoundly unnerved. When her doorbell rang at 7 p.m., her heart stuttered. Peering through the peephole, she saw him. Seung-Min. He wasn't holding flowers or gifts. He just stood there, his hands in the pockets of his simple dark jacket, not a bespoke suit, his expression open, a little nervous, his wavy hair falling softly around his strong, handsome features. She opened the door. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," he said, his voice soft, preempting her fears. "I'm here to ask you to dinner. Just dinner." The grand gestures were gone. There was no helicopter waiting to whisk her to a private island, no jeweler's box burning a hole in his pocket. It was just a man asking a woman to share a meal. It was the most profound gesture he could have made. He took her to a small, family-owned Jeju-do black pork place tucked away on a side street, the kind they'd loved in the early days. The air smelled gloriously of smoke and savory spices. There was no business talk, no rehashing of old wounds. They talked about her latest runway show, about the novel she was reading, about the documentary he'd watched on the history of Korean cinema. It was simple. It was normal. It was everything their life hadn't been for years. Afterward, he drove her back to the penthouse. "I have one more thing to show you," he'd said. And the trust she felt in that moment was a new, fragile thing. He didn't lead her to the dining room set for a performance. He led her to the living room. The lights were dim, and a single comfortable armchair had been pulled to the center of the room. On a small table beside it sat a stack of files and a single burning candle. Sit, please, he said. She did, warily. He picked up the top file. This is the global AI acquisition, he said, and handed it to her. She opened it. Stamped across the first page in bold red letters were the words, "Withdrawn by Kang Seung-Min." Her eyes shot to his. He picked up another. This is the proposal for the London expansion. The same red stamp, "Withdrawn." File by file, he showed her the New York office, the aggressive acquisition of a rival chipmaker, the Asian market consolidation. Every single legacy project, every monument to his ambition that had consumed him, that had built the wall between them, was closed, withdrawn. I dissolved the holding company that managed them, he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I've restructured the business, promoted a chief operating officer to run the day-to-day. My role is advisory now, part-time, focused only on innovation, not empire building. Emily could only stare, the papers trembling in her hands. He hadn't just walked away from one deal in a moment of crisis. He had systematically dismantled the entire machine. I'm not the man I was before, Emily, he said, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. The gesture was one of humility, not proposal. And I don't want to be. That man was driven by a fear of being nothing. He thought a fortune could make him feel full. It only made him hollow. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, waiting for permission. She turned her palm up, and his fingers laced with hers, warm and sure. The skin-to-skin contact was an immediate, powerful jolt, a reminder of the deep, visceral language they spoke. I don't want a legacy made of paper and stock options. I want a legacy of mornings drinking tea with you, of afternoons in your studio, watching you paint and design. I want to be the man who remembers, the man who listens. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but this time they were not of pain or confusion. They were tears of release. The final heavy stone of doubt that had anchored her heart for a year finally dissolved, leaving her light, unmoored, and free. She saw the truth in his eyes. It wasn't a promise for the future. It was a report on the present. He had already done the work. He had already chosen. Not just once, but every day for the past year, he had chosen a different path, quietly and without expectation. I believe you, she whispered, the words a balm on both their souls. She stood, pulling him up with her, his muscled frame rising easily. With her free hand, she pulled out her phone, scrolling until she found it. The song, the same slow, soulful Afro-R&B melody they had danced to in their first apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and limitless hope. She pressed play. The music filled the spacious room, no longer feeling sterile, but full of potential. She stepped into his arms, her head finding its old, perfect place against his shoulder. His good arm, the one that had held her through countless nights, wrapped around her, strong and certain. Her curvy body fit against his hard frame in a familiar, agonizingly perfect lock. They began to move, a slow, swaying dance in the semi-darkness, the music enveloping them. There were no words. None were needed. The past was not forgotten. The scars of forgetfulness and loneliness would always be a part of their story, but they were no longer bleeding. They were reminders of how lost they had been and how hard they had fought to find their way back. He held her closer, his lips brushing the edge of her boho braids near her temple. His hand, warm and heavy, settled intimately on the small of her back, the pressure a silent command. I choose you, Emily, he murmured into the quiet, his voice thick with a rediscovered devotion. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. You are my fire, Em. She tilted her head up, her tears glistening in the candlelight, her eyes fixed on his. I choose you too, Min. I choose the man who came back to the heat. Their love wasn't the perfect, untouchable thing it had been at the start. It was wiser. It was stronger. Forged in the fire of loss and tempered by the conscious, daily choice to rebuild, it was real again. And as they danced in the living room, two people who had almost lost everything, the city glittered below, a silent witness to a quiet, triumphant victory. Not of ambition, but of the heart and the unquenchable, visceral desire that had finally forced them to be honest. Did this powerful second chance story melt your heart and reignite your belief in true love? If you loved the intense chemistry between Emily and Seung-Min, hit that subscribe button, comment your favorite moment below, and give this video a thumbs up. Join our community for more stories that prove love can conquer even the coldest ambition.